So hello, in this video we will learn how to work with spline materials and how to achieve materials like plastic, wood, metal and glass, and as a bonus, the plasticine. And I'm not gonna talk about all materials in spline because then it will make this tutorial infinitely long, but I will focus on the most used and most important materials. So fasten your seatbelts, it will be a big and complex topic. Materials in spline actually works pretty familiar, quite the same experience we have in Figma or Sketch. To start work with material, select an object. In the Object Option panel, you will find the Material section. Any object by default already has a lighting layer and color. But even lighting is not a part of material. In Spline, lighting is the only one option you can't delete or add. It's always there, and you can only turn it off. And lighting here is a pretty important thing, because lighting settings affect the whole picture of object's material. So let's start from understanding how this lighting works. First of all, if I will switch it off, we will see how our object become flat. So here, with this lighting option, we tell our object how it should interact with light around. And by default, we have two sources of light at our scene. This directional light and ambient light. You can find it in the project panel. And here, we say, please object, interact with light. So when I will, for example, move a light source, the light and shadow picture also will change. So the lighting option here is helping our object to be affected by the light source and interact with them. Here we also have something like transparency, which in case of light works more like intensity. For example, we want this object to reflect the light in a more smooth way, or strong. At 100%, shadow will be darker or complete black if there will be not enough light. Also here, for almost all materials, we have the blending mode. In Spline, for materials you have only 4 modes: normal, multiply, screen and overlay. But how the blending mode works, I will explain a little bit later in this video. Let's finish with lighting option first. If you click here on icon, you will expand a popover with additional options. In a nutshell, these options in case of lighting can help you achieve the right surface reflection. But what does it mean? Let's say that your object, while interacting with light, can reflect this light, and this reflection can help us understand this material. Is it a soft plastic or glossy metal? In a nutshell, the light spot on the object will imitate object's surface. If light spot clean, sharp and bright, it's a glossy surface, like a chrome, glass or plastic. If it's blurred and dim, then it's a matte surface. So first thing you should done with the light is to convey the right object surface feeling. To do that, here we can set type, which will change the reflection spot. So if I select Lambert, we will see how our cubes absorb most of the light. It's pretty the same how, for example, can absorb light material like concrete. So we can say that this surface of our object definitely not glossy, it's matte. If I select Phong, the object become a little bit more brighter, but still matte. It's more like a matte plastic. And if I select Physical, we will see this sharp light reflection on the top edge, which represent as some glossy material. Now it feels like a glossy plastic. So by these 3 types, you actually can configure how matte or glossy your object should be. There is another one type, Toon. And honestly, I really don't use this type. But this type create cartoonish reflection and shadow, where usually in some cartoons we see this sharp transition between light and dark parts, so this shadow definitely not realistic. Every type has its own settings, and the most interesting for us is the settings for the physical type. Here we have roughness, metalness and reflectivity, and as it is clear from the names, with the help of these settings we can achieve certain surface effects. So roughness can also change the surface reflection from glossy to matte. You can see how reflection is changing here. This stripe of light actually is a reflection of our light source, so it's like a mirror. We can see our light sphere. To feel and understand how light works, time to time rotate your object or scene. Metalness also actually can make object more matte or glossy, but mostly while changing this option you will see how darker become our object. The bigger this value, the darker this object will be, but more lights will be reflected. Reflectivity changed how much light will be reflected. What is important to know about the lighting option in Material? First, it works only when we have a source of light in our scene. If you will have not any source of light, you can turn it off. By the way, even you don't have any lights here, you still have the default ambient light. But we will talk more about light in one of our next video. Second, how light interact with the object also depends on object shape. So here you can see, even we have two objects with the same light settings, the right one looks better, more realistic, because the right one has a smoother rounding and better grid. And you can see how reflection here is sharper. And the third, in Material, light is just one of the layers. So the position of the material layer here is important, and every layer in the top will be more prioritized. So if I put this lighting below to the color, now the color layer is on top, and all I see just my object with gray color, no light, reflects and shadows. So the hierarchy of material layer is important here. In the physical type, we also have rough map and bump map, and in the font type we have the bump map drop down as well. So we will back to the lighting material later to understand what this map could do. But now let's talk about this material layer, color. You already see that by default, at least at this moment of current Spline version, we have a color layer, a simple material layer. Here we can only change the color, transparency, and the blending mode. As because lighting layer is above the color layer, we see the color and the light and shadows on our object. Light here also can affect the color. You might have the situation when your colors are not so bright. Check your lighting options and remember, in real life, colors of the object is just an information our brain received with the light. So that's why even I have a fully white color, my object looks a little bit gray, because my cube is white, but my light isn't so bright. But sometimes just color and light are not enough to achieve some nice material. Here, where the arrow icon, we have a list of other materials. Let's take a look at some options. Image. Simple material where you can upload your own image. Perfectly works when we create some mockups, design for packages, or when we create some textures. You can start by applying some images from Spline collection. For some cases it's very helpful, but you also can upload your own image. Most important setting for image is the type of projection, because depends on what shape your object is, the special projection you need to select if you want to see your image properly. How you already may understood, if you, for example, have a spherical object, better to use spherical projection. If you have something cylindrical, use cylinder. Triplanar works good with complex or mesh objects. Sometimes you will see how Spline recommend you to switch to the triplanar projection, because default UV projection will not work with your object. Let me show you a few examples. Here we have a simple cube, a sphere, cylinder, and in the next row, the same shapes but as mesh. Remember that we can convert simple 3D shape to the mesh like that. And all these objects has the same material, with the same settings of image material layer. The image projection here is a UV right now. UV is a complex 3D term, and honestly we will not dive deeply into this because in the beginning we don't need to understand how UV mapping is working. What I want to show you how different projections will work with different shapes. You can select any projection you want, depending on what you want to receive. But you already can see that mesh object hasn't any images. UV projection works good with simple 3D shapes, but since you convert your object to the mesh, to use UV projection you need to upload a proper image. Usually UV image or UV map is prepared image, and this image is based on the object's shape. So yes, we haven't any tool in Spline to create these maps. So that is why we will not use this type of projection so often. So in this case, you can see how different projections help us to see the image layer. For sphere, I can select spherical projection. For this object, cylindrical. And for this complex shape from the previous lesson, I will use triplanar. Or spherical. Yeah, spherical works much better. What about cube? Let's see. Yes, triplanar is the best option. So why we need other options? For example, planar. Planar will help you to position your image on a specific side of your shape. For example, I have this sticker mockup, and I need to put this image on this sticker. I can select the image layer, upload my image, but to see my image, I need to select planar and choose right axis. So here I'm looking from the that axis perspective, so I will choose that. After a few manipulations, I will perfectly set my image. So look at the planar projection. Like at the situation, how do you direct the projector to your object? Planar is a good type when you work with mockups. Every projection has their own options, but all these options is about behavior of your image. You can crop your image or leave it as is, as a repeatable pattern. You can scale your image and move it inside the frame. But image layer also can help you to create a texture surface of your object. For example, it could be leather effect, or scratched metal, or any other 3D textures. So what you see here is a result of bump map. Bump map is about light behavior based on image. I can add image layer and select any image from this library. And now I can select my light layer, and in options, if it's a font or physical, in the bump map dropdown I can choose my image I selected before. And now I can just make the image layer full transparency. I don't want to see the image itself. I only need the bump map functionality. So we create some texture surface, imitation, and this option is in the light settings, is because it's not just an image, it's a light and shadow behavior based on this image. You can see how while changing light position, the light and shadow picture changed here. To increase the effect, in physical option we can select image as a roughness map. So the light will highlight our object differently, as the surface of our object will not vary. When you apply bump image, you have the intensity value, how deep and sharp the texture could be, but I'm not recommend you to go further than 5 from both sides. Sometimes minus 0.1 is enough to have a nice and realistic effect. For a bump map, better to use normal map image. It's a special, usually looks like this image, which shows the depth. And based on this depth, Spline understands how light should work. So with bump map, you can achieve pretty realistic textured surface, like this. One more example. This is a simple cube with a brick wall image. It looks flat, right? Because cube surface is flat, but as soon as I apply this brick wall image as a bump map in the lighting settings, now this feels much more realistic because now light understands that there are some irregularities here. So light behave like there is not a flat surface anymore. So use bump map as one of these options which can help you to make your 3D realistic, because this is about details. Remember I told you about 3 key things for good looking 3D, details is one of these. Look at this old coin. This coin itself consists of a few materials, light with bump map and color. And the bump map is normal map image of the coin. So sometimes light layer, color and image is enough to make a realistic material, but let's see what other materials from this list could be useful. Next material is video. Yes, you really can upload video as a part of material. How to use it is limited only by your imagination and whether you have a paid subscription, but video works the same as image, the same settings. Next is the depth. Very useful material, I use it a lot. The depth, it's like a gradient. When we have a start color and end color, but while gradient works from one side to another, the depth works from one coordinate point to another. By default, depth has a radial type, so if I cut my cube in half, you will see like a sphere, and the center of the sphere is one color, and the end of the sphere is another color. And I can move this sphere by this pivot point. To do that, I need to select the depth icon here, and while depth options window will open, I can change the position of this depth, and I can select where colors can start and end, so I can make it smaller or bigger. Let's see other options we have in depth material. Origin, by default it's vector, but we also can select camera. So when we have origin by vector, our depth material will be fixed to the shape, and even if we will rotate our object, we always will have the same result. Now I set this to camera. So now the depth material will be linked to the camera, so while rotating the object, the picture will be different. Let's go back to the vector origin. Blending. It's about displaying color transition. Here you can only select what you prefer more based on how it looks like. Ramp. This is familiar to us with gradient line. Here we set colors we want to have, from one color to another, and we can add more than one color. Type. We can switch from radial to linear, so it would behave more like a simple gradient. The colors would change across the line, from one point to another. Here, we just need to set the direction of this depth line. To set the direction, type 1 in one of these fields. So for example, if I want a vertical direction, type 1 at Y field because it represents Y axis. So you can make a bar for 3D chart. The last and also nice option is position. So here you can set how your depth will interact with your object. It's pretty the same as origin, but it works good when you have more than one object with the same material. Or for example, you have a cloner. So if I apply cloner, we will see how every copy just copies the same material. But if I switch in depth the position from local to world, my depth layer will interact not only with this original object, but also with others, like it's one object. A few examples how I use depth to achieve some nice effects. For example, you can use a depth to make artificial shadow, like this. Or you can just make a colorful surface using multiple depth materials, like this. Next must-have to know material is Fresnel. And yes, originally it spells Fresnel, not Fresnel. This material creates some kind of backlight effect. It can be used when you want to achieve the effect of glowing or when you need to imitate some color reflection. It's not so visible on cube, so let me show example on a sphere. Quick example how and when I use this material. First, I want to create some glowing effect. If you add a Fresnel layer, you can change the color, the bias, the scale, intensity, and factor. Factor can invert the Fresnel. So for example, I can hide all other materials and now my sphere would look like a glowing sphere. The second example. Remember I told you about context as one of the principles of good looking 3D? So this object is in some blue space. So I think this object should also reflect some blue light. So when I add this material with the same color as my background, this object will look more natural in this scene. Then we have the next material, the rainbow. Very specific material. With this material you can achieve a lot of interesting effects, but mostly I use it to create chrome effect or detailed plastic surface. So when I add this material, it already looks like chrome. And this material works good with difficult shapes, with shapes which has many bands for example, because if I apply this material to the sphere, while rotating, this sphere looks like this material staying in the same place. This material is very sensitive to the object shape. So this material itself generates a special pattern when the light and dark parts replace each other. And by clicking on this icon, you can find some options. Frequency is how often this pattern would be. Usually, to create a nice effect, I set this value around 3 or 5. And with movement, we can move this pattern by steps, from light to dark part. By the way, this pattern is partly transparent. So the dark part is actually what we see under the rainbow material. So I can, for example, change the color of my shape and see this color through the rainbow material. But I could add some colors in the rainbow pattern by changing this row, where we have RGB channel. So while changing, I can have very nice effects, which by the way, you will not use or use it very, very rarely. But what could be really helpful is a noise. In this scene, I use the rainbow material with noise to create this soft material effect. So here, noise is from no noise to noise a lot, and here, the size of noise. Anyway, very specific material, play with this material to feel it better. Next material I will explain to you is outline. The outline material could remind you the stroke or border like in Figma or Sketch, but it's not exactly the same, at least because here we are talking about 3D object. But yeah, outline material helps us to create border around our object, and this border will take into account the object's silhouette. It means you will see outline effect depends on object projection, so while rotating this object, the stroke will adapt the shape. Outline in the settings has two parts, outline and contour. In outline part, we will work with this outline we see here, so we can change the color of the stroke, the width, which works like thickness. By the way, the width will always the same while you zoom in or zoom out your scene. It doesn't matter for stroke, just take it into account this probably strange behavior. We also have a threshold, so here you can set, let's say, the level of displaying the stroke to show it only around object or also on any band of your model, Nice effect for cartoon style, for example. And smoothing, which as you can see, makes stroke more sharp or more blurry. And type, so here you can set show stroke only inside the model or inside and outside. Then we have contour section, and this section can help us to create lines look like slices based on shape. So to see these lines, first switch to continuous lines, and then adjust width while you will happy, then frequency to make like more or less amount of lines. Then you can change a color and change the direction of lines. And interesting thing here is that you can summarize directions. So for example, now direction is on x-axis, but I can make it diagonal after choosing y-axis as well. So contour create this picture. It looks like some kind of topology map or as slices of your object. Here, one of example how to use this material. Next material is a glass, also one of my favorite materials. So if you want to make your object transparent like a glass, start with this material. But remember, this material works better when you have another object on your scene, which can be visible through this glass, because then it makes effect of glass more natural. But glass in spline honestly quite limited. First of all, at least now, it's impossible to see object with glass behind the other object with glass. Hope someday it will be fixed. So to understand some options of the glass, I need to see another object behind. Firstly, we can change the blur. So do we want a crystal clear glass, so there is no blur here, or some kind of matte glass, so we can increase some blue value. Thickness and reflection are about reflection distortion at all, so in real life, the object through the glass cube will be distorted, so we can achieve the same effect here, and it also made our glass feels more natural. But when you make some glass material, adding just this glass layer isn't enough, so try to combine glass with correct lighting. For example, if you have crystal clear glass, that means you will have sharp reflection, so set the physical light. If your glass will matte, also try to use more matte surface with Fonck or Lambert type of lighting, for example. And in the real world, glass also has some reflections, like a mirror. On the glass surface we can see reflections of the world. By the way, when we will talk about export scene from Spline, we will talk about the glass material again, as because now Spline can't export, for example, PNG image with transparent glass. Yes, it's a problem which should be solved one day. So it's a good time to talk about next material, matcaps. My most lovely material here. Matcap is like an image material. You upload a special image which can create amazing effect. I have a big library of these images and I will share this library with you. So what is it and how it works? If you see these images in the Spline library with some spheres, these are special images for matcap. Matcap is some kind of dynamic material. When you rotate your object in real world, the surface of the object will interact with this world, with lights, with other objects, so matcaps allows you to create this imitation. Most of the time, matcaps can help you to achieve glass, metal, chrome materials and much more. I promise you will like it. Let me show you an example. Just 2 steps to create pretty realistic 3D cube just with one matcap material. Create a cube, switch color to matcap, and select, for example, this one. Nice, right? How about chrome? Looks so realistic. Realistic because we believe that this object is real because the reflections are so natural. Matcap material also very sensitive to the shape, so the more complex your object will be, many bands it will have, the nicer matcap will work. For example, this is a simple sphere with matcap. When we will rotate the sphere, we will not understand that we rotated, because sphere's shape is perfectly smooth and it perfectly reflects the surrounding. We need something static on this sphere to understand that this sphere actually rotates. And matcaps can be more powerful with blending modes. Let's back to our glass material. So here, using matcap, I can achieve a very nice glass reflection. I just add a matcap above the glass and light layers. Select image like that, and what I see? I see cube with black and white parts. Now I switch the blending mode from normal to screen, and now I see only white parts. This is how blending mode works. Normal is just about to see the layer by itself. Multiply is about skip the lightest part and save the darkest. Screen is vice versa, skip the darkest part and show the lightest. And overlay, well, hard to explain how overlay blend mode works. Usually it multiplies the impact of all colors to all. Blending works with every material layer except displace material. Material layer with special blending mode affects everything what is below this material layer. And the next material is the displace. This material distorts object, and one important thing to understand about this material to see how it works with your object. This object should have more sides. So default cube just has 1 by 1 by 1. It's not enough for displace. If you really want to distort the cube with displace, you need to increase the amount of sides. The more sides your object will have, the more detailed and smoother the distortion will be. But also remember, the more sides your object will have, the lower the performance of your scene would be. But now see the deformation. The nice fact is that we actually do not really deform our object. The displaced material just creates imitation, so here I still have my cube. Let's see what displace could do. First of all, there is no transparency and blending mode, because this material is quite unique. It doesn't change material style, it changes the shape. So the position of the material layer here also doesn't matter. It doesn't interact with other materials. So here we have intensity, but at the same time, we have next options. Click on this icon. Here we have the type. It's a type of distortion. And all this type, except for annoy, has the same set of options. The scale is how frequent will the distortion pattern be. Movement and offset is just for animation, so let's skip for now. So with the displace, you can quickly create a blob. Add a displace layer, adjust how you want it, and ta-da! Done. So yeah, most of the time displace is used for making deformation and creates blobs. I use this material a lot. It helps to create imperfection of the surface, which feels so realistic. A few examples with displace. And the very last material I will explain here is the pattern. The pattern layer creates pattern. You have some prepared shapes for the pattern, such as circle, ring, polygon, cross, diamond, checkboard, line, and wave. You also can select projection. Remember image layer? We need to project pattern layer to our shape, and depends on what kind of shape we have, select the correct projection. Triplanar always work well with meshes. With offset, we can move our pattern. With colors, we can select the color of the pattern elements and choose the background color. We also can make one of these colors transparent, so you will be able to see other layers you have below the pattern material layer. With frequency, you can change the frame size, and with size, you can change the size of the pattern piece, and the variations create some randomness of the piece's size. Smoothness here is something between transparency and blur. Zigzag will change offset of every second line on the pattern, and rotation will rotate not the pattern pieces but frames. So while working with material layer, you can add as much as you want to achieve some nice result. Remember that for most of all materials except displace, the position in this hierarchy is important. If you have light in the scene and you want your object to interact with this light, leave it turned on. In other cases, you can turn it off, because materials itself don't need the light, and you can achieve some light and shadow imitation with other materials. So here we have the object, which has light part and some shadow, but there are no light source in this scene. So this is just imitation, the same how some designers drew 3D objects in Figma, for example, by imitating the light and shadow. Here I'm using just one material, the depth. Or here, this object also has turned off the lighting and there is no light source around. This object has just a matcap layer. The matcap image itself creates imitation of light and shadows. So Spline is about this. It's not just 3D tool, it's a graphic tool with 3D possibilities. So you decide how to achieve some result. With light in a way how it works in other 3D programs, or just imitate it and draw it. One more thing about materials. At some moment of your work, you might have tons of objects with the same materials, but it's quite hard to manage them all. So here in Spline, you have projects material assets. When you create some material, you can click on these 4 dots and then press plus and just save your material to the project assets. Now you can assign this material to the other projects, and then from the project inspector you can find your material assets. Now you can work on this material and see the changes for all objects which were assigned to this material. Very convenient. Or you can just copy material of the object from menu and pass this material to the selected object. But I really recommend you to use material assets because it makes your work more convenient and productive. Also, you might notice this window. This is a material library which is available only for paid subscriptions. I explained to you material logic in Spline, and in the next video we will learn how to achieve materials like plastic, glass, wood, metal, and as a bonus, plasticine. See you!